So back when I was doing the podcast, one of the things that I talked about on a few episodes is my belief that video games need to become a subscription service, and that even though I was rather incredulous about things like EA Access, when I tried them out, I discovered that, this could be a way to make gaming a little bit less risky and perhaps a little bit cheaper depending on your needs than the current model we have now. And it was interesting. Last week, actually, week and a half ago, I should say, the reviews or the first impressions of Mass Effect Andromeda became, were released, and it kind of became clear after reading them that there was a kind of hive mind attack on this game. It was kind of like the opposite of Breath of the Wild, where everyone went online and praised Breath of the Wild as one of the greatest games of all time. A week later, they came online and trashed Mass Effect Andromeda for being a major disappointment. And this movement we have between extreme hype and almost splenetic disappointment when a game doesn't perfectly conform to our expectations is, I think, part and parcel of a distribution model of games which is kind of problematic. And as the generations continue, as the costs of AAA development rise, we are either forced to build this insane hype around the game or to be absolutely furious when things just don't click the way we had hoped. So I think the subscription model gets around that problem. Rather than spending $60 on a AAA title and being disappointed, you could pay a monthly fee. Now, how much is that fee going to be? Well, Xbox has just talked about their Game Pass service being $10 a month and kind of releasing not exactly new, but more recent titles than, say, EA Game Pass. But I would imagine a full-fledged subscription service would probably cost a bit more than $10 a month. And yet I still think it would confer a lot of benefits. So I wrote a Reddit article about this, and I'll link to it below. And in that article, I gave an example of Activision. So Activision is a company in which I have very little interest. I don't play Call of Duty. I didn't get into Destiny. And yet, if they had a subscription service in 2016, I could have checked out these new Call of Duty games that happen in space. Let's say it was $20 a month, and they probably would force a 3-month commitment on you for the subscription service, going to get you paying the cost of a full game. So let's say I paid that. And for $20 a month, or they may not even do that, who knows, just as for the sake of an example. I could have played those new Call of Duty and space games, and maybe, kind of being a sci-fi fan, maybe I would have liked it. I could have also played Transformers Devastation, which I actually have played, and that's a very good game. They have a Turtles game similar to that. And I could have tried Overwatch, which of course was Game of the Year. And if these games were really good, to say nothing of all these Destiny releases that happened as well, but if these games were really good, maybe I would have purchased some DLC. Maybe I would have continued to pay the subscription service, and Activision would have gone from getting $0 from me to getting $60. It's a change in business model, of course, and it means maybe making less per game, but getting more of a revenue stream from more of the gaming community. And, they can price this however they want to price it. You can have people who pay kind of like a baseline subscription. Then you can have a VIP subscription, which gives you access to the newest games as soon as they release. But however you do it, I think for the AAA publishers at least, you create a model where you're not absolutely tied to the next financial quarter and getting that game out the door regardless of its problems, regardless of a lack of creativity. I mean, Mass Effect Andromeda, yes, those models, character models, do not look good. They've gone from the uncanny valley to the uncanny chasm, but I'm not convinced that it's as bad a game as people are making it out to be. It was released right after Zelda. It had so much hype for so many years. But maybe if it was released as a subscription, they had a, EA, well, EA does have access, but they had a broadened access program. They had a constant revenue stream. Maybe they could have afforded to sort of push this out into the future and correct these problems. Now, there are some objections, and actually, I'll address some of the objections in the Twitter, or in the Reddit thread. I'll attach that below. You can read some of these things, but a couple of objections that immediately stand out. Production costs are extremely high. I don't know how high they are, but the question is, what will the market bear? Does it have to be a Netflix price, in which case it's probably not going to work? Will the market bear $20? I would argue that they would. Do you have to pay a little bit more? Do you have to offer something like, well, it's going to be $25 on a monthly basis, but if you subscribe for 6 months, it's going to be $20, something like that? That's something that I think there's enough data for the publishers to work out. It does leave indie and mid-sized developers out of this. They don't have enough content to start a full-fledged subscription service. But then again, the PSN store, the Xbox store, has given them a way to get their content out there. And, I think consumers are basically in a point now where that's where they go for the indie games. So there's already an ecosystem for that. Same thing with kind of the mid-sized developers. Now, I will say that if you have a company with a legacy like Atlas or Capcom or something like that, you could put together a subscription service that bundles in some of the retro stuff as well as a couple of the new releases, maybe for around $10 a month. I think that would definitely be worth it. Sony and Microsoft could come up with ways to license some of the mid-size games and give companies like NIS America, Arc Systems Works, a chance to get in on the subscription market. But I think the revenue stream would really, really help publishers to get out of this kind of almost parasitic AAA publishing model, where they have to have a hit. If they don't have a hit immediately, it's an utter disaster. And I mentioned on the podcast, I forget her name now. I think her name is Carol Hennig or Habig, but she was one of the directors of the Uncharted series. She came out and said, crunch time is terrible. This, crunch development hours where you're in the office, 14, 15 hours a day. You don't get to see your family. And the payoff, from her perspective, is not worth it. If people are going to trash the game, if it's going to go on to the discount shelf at Walmart in 2 months, that the personal price that a lot of these developers pay is not worth the reception that the game gets. And I can't help to think that Mass Effect Andromeda, the team behind that is feeling that sting. Is it such a bad game? I don't know. It's not a series that ever appealed to me. It's not something I have the time to explore, but something tells me it's not as putrid as some people make it out online. And I think you would, by having a subscription model, you get into a situation where the comfort of having that revenue stream would allow the big developers to take chances. Because if you had, to take the example of Activision, your Warhorse, Call of Duty, and what is that little toy game? I don't know what it's called. Outlanders, or the little sort of their amiibo thing, which was incredibly popular. And of course, the Blizzard cash cow. Maybe it would give them a chance to experiment with a type of game that we haven't seen before and create an IP that goes on to then become kind of a Warhorse game. But if you read, I'm not going to read every one of these. This actually got some traction on Reddit. But if you read some of the complaints, and some of these people on Reddit hated the fact that I posted this and downvoted me into oblivion, don't really care about that, but some of their arguments are a little rough. So, for example, if the kind of recurring theme was, well, I want to own my own games. I don't like this. I hate digital. I want to own my own games. Well, I think the future of video games is a digital future, even if the gateway to some of these these digital worlds happens to be on a physical disc. And one of the comparisons I made, for which I was downvoted, but I still think it's a valid comparison, is take something like Titanfall. I bought a physical copy of Titanfall, and yet that game relied heavily on its online component to be playable at all. You had to get into those online matches. If you didn't, I mean, all you could play was the training mode. They didn't even have, at least on initial release, they didn't even have a bot mode. So yeah, I do have that disc, and when the servers go down, I guess presumably I could replay those couple tutorial levels. But the bulk of the game exists in the cloud, and I will not have access to it. So Titanfall and many other games like it are service, whereas the physical media that I love, say my copy of Chrono Trigger, is in my closet on that Super Nintendo cart in the same form that it was in 1995 when it was released. So the question then becomes, are games worth owning physically in the same way that they were 20 years ago? I don't think that that's the case. As games become more integrated online, as they function essentially as services, why not, make them what they are? They are a service. Now, some people said, well, then, I can't go back to it, but I pay for it for 1 month, and then it gets deleted, and I'd have to start over. I don't think that's how you would design a modern subscription service. I mean, I very rarely subscribe to Netflix, maybe once a year. If I have some free time, I'll buy a month and watch a movie or two. But it remembers what I've watched before. It knows where I stopped and stuff like that. Same thing with HBO, their pay-as-you-go service. So I think probably if you're going to build a modern subscription service, all of your data would be saved to the cloud as far as your progress goes. And hey, you buy it in December, you let the subscription lapse, you move into August, those games are still there for you. Now you have the question of, well, I have to re-download it or something like that. That is an issue. I will, because storage space, at least when you get these consoles out of the box, is not great. But anyway, let's assume you download it again, or you just never delete it, fire it up again, subscription is active, you pick up right where you left off. So I don't know that we're really in a world where these games are going to be worth owning physically. The other kind of objection that a lot of these posters said, well, it's going to make game companies lazier. They're going to sort of rest on their laurels, and they're going to release buggy games, and they'll have no incentive to patch it because the money's coming in. I totally disagree with that. I think we're in that situation now. The only difference is we're paying EA or Ubisoft or whatever the case might be. We're paying them $60 a release for buggy, incomplete games. If you had a service, then it would be less of a sting. I didn't pay $60 for this game. I have, I'm paying $20 a month, or I'm paying $10 a month. I have access to a number of complete games that I'm also playing, and hey, this product, I can't think of the latest Ubisoft game, Far Cry 4, hey, it looks great. It looks like a lot of fun. Has some issues. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to play something else. Now, hopefully they'll get their act together, but these developers are lazy to a degree. There are a lot of development costs to take into consideration, but I also think the pressure would be there because let's say people sign up for the next AAA game from EA, and they see 1 month, bunch of $20 subscriptions coming, and they release that game, and it absolutely sucks. It's a buggy mess. People will discontinue their subscription for the next month or whenever it runs out, and hey, maybe you don't get that full $60 buy-in. So I think games would actually, the incentive would be to make games interesting and higher quality over a longer period of time to keep the subscription money coming in. And if we're really in a situation to sort of criticize games and to say, well, we don't really trust these developers to give us a working product regardless of the business model, then gaming has a problem. Then we're headed towards a crash. Another kind of complaint was, we don't want to give up our ownership rights. We don't want to enter a digital world where we give up our ownership of the game. And of course, legally, with these EULAs, if you actually read them, I mean, we don't really have an ownership stake in the game. Yes, of course, we can resell it, and that's not a problem, although we saw how Sony and Microsoft did attempt to limit our ability to do that at the start of this console generation. It blew up in their face, but I'm sure they'll try it again. So I think that's a weak ownership argument. And then if you look at what are the alternatives to digital distribution via subscription, well, the alternative we have right now, which is the PlayStation Store, the Xbox Store, which, while kind of reasonable for indie games, is way too expensive for, in my opinion, for regular AAA games or kind of mid-tier games that are always at their MSRP. I mean, that's not the digital future that I want, where if I want to play MLB 16, I got to pay $60, and hey, it's 2018 now. And they've gotten better with sales, but they're not at the Steam level yet. Steam would be the ideal. I think the current situation is unacceptable, where everything stays at or near its MSRP. I think the subscription model kind of is a nice go-between, between the panacea, which is Steam, and the current garbage model that we have now on the Xbox Store and the PlayStation Store. So I think we need, as consumers, to kind of recalibrate how we see games. And I look at it this way, and I'll take a game that I love, and that is the Yakuza series, Yakuza 0. Put about 40 or 50 hours into that game, played it for the better part of the month, and loved it, and I'm happy to own it. I'm happy to have supported Sega. But if Sega had a subscription service, I get all the back catalog Genesis games. I could get a couple of their new releases, and let's say Yakuza 0 was part of that. I mean, I played that game pretty consistently for a month. I finished it, and I doubt I'll ever go back to it. I don't see a point where I would play through that huge narrative again. I mean, maybe I would go back. I mean, I always play the end game content, but I never really restart, in that Game Plus mode where I get to kind of keep all my abilities and stuff like that. To me, there's other things I want to do with my time. I already beat the game. I don't need to go through it again. So, yeah, I love that game, but I will not play it again for another month. So if I had subscribed to Sega for that month and gotten a chance to play it, plus some of their other stuff, I would have been satisfied. I think the $60 model is becoming very dangerous. If a blockbuster game like Mass Effect Andromeda could have any, a good portion of its sales potential destroyed without having been on the market for any length of time, I mean, that's an issue. And I'm not one to defend companies, but I think we're getting into this death spiral here where we're having the high expectations, buying the $60 game. We've lost the critical capacity to judge games. So I think there is a space for this. Now, as I hinted to in the Reddit post, I mean, this is not the only option. I mean, you can have a subscription service, and hey, if you like that game, if that game speaks to you, you could pay a fee to own it outright. Or you could buy the physical copy or the special edition to support the developers. But there is a niche for this. I think if you sort of get out of the mindset of the early 2000s, of the 90s, where you have to buy and own every game, I think there's an opportunity here to play more games at a lower price and have actually a better relationship with these publishers than we have now. I mean, anything can be abused, and they should pay the price for any kind of abuse or exploitation of the player base. But I actually think we are in that kind of exploitative situation with a lot of releases, and a subscription service is the way out of it. Let me know what you think below.